Following a very difficult weekend of far-right rioting, which has seen attacks on asylum hotels in Rotherham and Tamworth, a children's library in Liverpool and a citizens' advice centre in Sunderland, some online platforms continue to host harmful content. Platforms are being utilised to recruit, promote and organise these far-right riots. Apps like Telegram and Signal have been identified as sites used for some of the organisation. We can talk to Times Radio reporter Ollie Cole, who's on these groups for journalistic reasons. Ollie, a very good afternoon. You did show Jane and I earlier in the office some of the content that was on some of the Telegram groups that you are part of. And, you know, we're quite old bats. We're a bit long in the tooth. We've seen quite a lot and we were horrified. So obviously, bleeping out the truly offensive words, can you give our listeners just a flavour of what you showed us?
Yeah, I think it is important to stress that, I am using the most sanitized language because we're on the radio, but hopefully it gives you a sort of sense of what is actually at the core of these groups and actually what is driving what is happening across social media and obviously in the real world in the riots we've seen over the weekend. So last night, while rioters set two hotels alight, housing asylum seekers, one group called for its followers to rise in the name of white power. We are at war, lads, arm yourselves, tribe and train. On another video of an asylum hotel set alight last night, one person says, and I will say this is quite horrific detail, they need to go into the room that was set alight by pouring petrol into it, then block the door and let them burn, show them what happens when you mock us. Other things in there include images of Adolf Hitler, praising him as a politician who cared for his people. I have actually, just before coming on the radio with you, I reopened a couple of the groups. Obviously, it's not great to be in them too long or too often, but I looked and found in one of them a Word document that's been posted, which is essentially describing itself as a manual for arson. Touted, it says, as the best way for young people embarking on a new path to get involved without the fear of actually killing the enemy. So that is the sort of distressing language that is in those groups. And I think what is sort of alarming about them is that this language is constant. It is worse than that. And nobody really bats an eyelid at it.
Yeah. So some of the stuff that you showed us did contain some really horrendous racist slurs and abuse. And you also showed us the post where the addresses of solicitors representing asylum seekers were listed with the emoji of the burning flame all around them. I know that we think this and our listeners will think this. How can all of that be out there? Surely this is illegal content.
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult with these platforms, as you'll go into shortly, I'm sure, that there is encryption on them. It is similar to WhatsApp in that, depending on what the chat is like or what the group is set up to be, not even the social media platform can have access to that chat unless someone, for example, copies and pastes or screenshots or does certain things. There are such things as disappearing messages. So, for example, someone might ask, is there any violence going on in the Midlands? And someone might reply with a photo of an event that they are preparing to take place, but that is what's called a dissolving image. So you look at it and within 3 seconds, it's dissolved in front of your thumb and never to be seen again. So those are the sort of differences. And then these things then permeate throughout other social medias. So, of course, that is at the sharp end, the most horrific end of those platforms. Those locations that I showed you, I woke up this morning and there was already a list of over 30 locations, refugee support centres, asylum and immigration hubs, immigration lawyers, all lined up as targets for further action on Wednesday. We're obviously not going to detail what they are because we don't want to publicise them, but that was already there. And then that is sort of screenshot and brought into an acceptable format on other platforms where, like you say, most of the public would balk at the idea of most of this language. You then screenshot it, you put it onto, say, a Facebook group, you take out the surrounding words and detail, and you just say, here's a load of protests that we're planning this, week or weekend, and people will turn up to them thinking that there's something else. But there is no doubt that what is driving those conversations, what is driving those events, is racist. It is not reasonable concerns or anything like that. It is vile.
Yeah. And give us an idea of the numbers who are posting and included in some of the groups that you've seen.
So there's a mix. The thing I can liken it to most is WhatsApp, which is probably more widely used than Telegram, where you have two forms of chat. You can have a direct chat with someone, then you can have either groups or channels. So you might have one person who's created a broadcast channel. So those messages, you would subscribe to that channel, and some of those have hundreds, some of those have thousands, 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people in them. And that is a sort of one-way stream of information. Others are group chats where, for example, since we have been on the air, a new 104 messages have appeared in one of them, 152 messages have appeared in another. It is a constant stream from what I've got here, 1,500 and something members, 73 people online at the moment, just constantly messaging this, basically.
Yeah, and if you just if you run that through the logic of how social media works, if you've got 1,000 people in a group who might have 15 contacts themselves, you can see how this can spread. How easy is it to get into these groups? And if you can get into them, then surely the law enforcement officers can get into them as well.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt that of those thousands, of those hundreds, there will be journalists, there will be people who are in there for gathering information in a similar way to I am at the moment. There are people in there who are, active in the conversations who, I would say are quite obviously, there for real causes. You have to sort of walk a path in a way. You might find one that is quite obvious and public, and through these groups, quite often people can forward messages or copy and paste messages, and it will say to you where those have been forwarded from. So you might then click through to the next one, to the next one, to the next one to sort of find where, these messages originate. So they are going around a lot of groups, and you can sort of, if you take your time, you can sort of trace your way right through it. Some of them involve people, showing support from other nations. I know that the government are looking at the minute into sort of what overseas actors are taking part in these groups and taking part in these messages. So there is a chain you can follow, but obviously most people in their right mind wouldn't want to follow it.
Yeah. Ollie, good work. Thank you very much indeed. That's Times radio reporter Ollie Cole.
Let's talk to Azim Rafiq, a former Yorkshire cricketer and anti-racism campaigner. The targeting of mosques across the country over the past week does seem to have exposed a really nasty undercurrent of racism and Islamophobia in this country. Azim Rafiq, how are you feeling about it all?
Yeah, it's been quite petrifying, actually. There's a lot of anxieties. We've just tried as much as possible to stay in touch with family members and make sure if anyone's going out that they're not alone. Just looking out for each other, really.
So I know you have family members who live in Rotherham or the Rotherham area. What have they said to you about it?
Yeah, again, I think everyone's just trying to take instructions from the leaders in the community, making sure we stay calm. But everyone's really worried. Just a couple of nights ago, I went to the petrol station, and normally I would just let my wife go in and get a couple of things. And I didn't feel like I could do that. I wasn't able to take my son to the mosque on Friday. It's a really worrying time, but I think it's exposed the underlying big issue that we do have in this country with racism and Islamophobia.
But this is not going to be tolerated, is it? The fact that you do not feel and your wider family doesn't feel safe going about its business in its hometown, it's just not something. It's not something that can last, surely.
Well, I don't know what's going to happen over the next few days. There's a lot of, I guess, we're trying to stay calm, but there's a lot of panic. Over the next few days, it seems to be that there's going to be more of this, and we're looking at ways to leave the area. But even sort of leaving the area and being in a different part is not going to escape you from this. So yeah, it's worrying times, and sadly, we should be talking about at the minute, and sending all our thoughts to the families and the community affected in Southport. But unfortunately, we seem to be having to deal with these riots.
Are you at least happy is probably the wrong word, but are you satisfied with the reaction of the Prime Minister in the sense that Sir Keir Starmer has promised protection for mosques? Is that something?
Definitely, I think it's a step forward. I think that's been communicated to the mosques over the last couple of days, and I think that has reassured people slightly. But I think it's where we go from there. It's what's the next stage as well, because we're really good in this country around sort of flash moments and commitments, but we need to really make sure we deal with this now.
Does this whole thing illustrate that, in fact, most of us have been perhaps in denial slightly, and we've chosen to ignore Islamophobia? We've pretended that it's only something that a very tiny minority of very ignorant people feel, and it's not really anything we should concern ourselves with. Do you believe, actually, the terrible events of the last week have just brought something that was always there to the surface?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd go a bit further. I think it has been. I think it's been coming for a while through our leaders, through our politicians, some of our media commentators, and I think it's been normalized. I think people of color have been dehumanized through language, and language has consequences. And we've seen that play out on our streets now. Just before I came on, I had a look to see if Suella Braverman has had anything to say, and through some of her language, I think if we're going to really deal with this, we've got to hold accountable the people that cause this, and that's those right at the top who have dehumanized us for a very long time.
Do you acknowledge in any way this idea of so-called two-tier policing, the notion that white working class protesters, some would perhaps be happier calling them rioters, the way they're treated compared to those people who perhaps would go on a pro-Palestinian march?
I'm completely lost. I've had dealings with the police in the last few years. It's a coincidence that I'm back in the UK at the minute for a few weeks. I had to leave the country because of speaking out and all the threats that I was receiving. And, I had practically no support from the police. So I don't really, I don't really understand it. It's another one of them things that feels like is very much whipped up and people sort of buy into it. And then, it's become a thing. Like I said, I've had experience with the police and it was non-existent support.
Right. So you certainly don't recognise that as an issue. Do you have any sympathy at all with a certain part of the white working class population of Britain that does feel ignored and left behind and senses that other people just get better treatment?
I have sympathy for anyone that feels that way. White working class, black people, and I think, rightly they should be listened to. But right now, I'd like, there's two things. One, I think right now is not the conversation. Mosques are being attacked. Black and brown people are being attacked on the streets. There's a democratic way. Ballot box 4 weeks ago, have conversations, go speak to your MPs. But these people are going out there and attacking mosques, attacking people, burning hotels. That is not the way to raise your concerns. And, we should not be in any way legitimizing any of that or even giving any excuse for that. But unfortunately, we're still seeing that, everyone has legitimized concerns. Everyone does, and there's a way to raise them. And this is not the way.
Thank you very much for your time. That's Azim Rafiq, former cricketer and a campaigner against Islamophobia and other forms of racism.